Hogwarts Castle A 5-inch gauge locomotive. This is part 12, making a set of brake blocks to fit the brake hangers. Before making the brake blocks, I'm just finishing off sealing the lead into the balance weights using some JB Weld. I also showed this in a previous video. It's a ring of cast iron brake blocks. Put it in the chuck, machine it, then chop it up to reveal the individual brake blocks. Then all you need to do is clean up the edges and drill the holes so you can mount them to the brake hangers. But it's not going to work with this engine because the brake hangers are actually quite scale. So I'm going to go with plan B. I went up to Blackgates Engineering and bought a piece of brass bar. And this brass bar is 1/4 of an inch thick by 1/2 inch wide. Then I asked Matt at Blackgates if he would be so kind and roll the piece of bar, using their proper set of bending rollers. The ones at Blackgates Engineering are electrically powered and quite big, because the set of bending rollers that I have are very small. And this is how it turned out. It's really good. What I'm doing here is cutting off the ends, because when you use bending rollers, the very end parts of the bar, or whatever you're rolling, isn't as accurate as the rest. All I'm doing is trimming about 1 inch off each end, and that way what's left is accurate to the diameter of the wheel. The next step is to mark and cut out the brake blocks from this ring. I have a 5-inch gauge model of a 14XX Great Western locomotive, and I featured this model in a video a while back as I rebuilt it. All I had to do was measure the brake blocks on that, then measure and mark some lines on the brass ring, followed by cutting out the individual brake blocks on the bandsaw. And in this clip I'm profiling the edges to the correct shape using my 1-inch belt sander, which is a very useful tool. After just taking the sharp edge off the other side, they all look like this. And before I get lots of communications from Inspector Meticulous and his cronies, making pointless comments like, "You can't make brake blocks out of brass, they're no good at all, they will not wear properly and they won't work." Now some of you will realise that I am not entirely stupid, so why have I made them out of brass? Because they're going to fit into these scale brake hangers, and they're going to be dummies. They are not working brakes. Fitting fully functioning working brakes to a locomotive in this scale is a complete waste of time. If you apply the brakes when you're running the engine, then the wheels are going to lock and flats will develop on the wheels. The only practical application for working brakes on a locomotive of this size is to stop it from rolling away on the steaming bay if you have a leaky regulator. This locomotive has a tender with working brakes, and that's sufficient to stop it rolling away. This is the first time I've used this machine. It's a Proxon milling machine, and it really is good. I'm amazed at this. Whenever I use milling cutters of this size in my large milling machine, I always break them. But not in this Proxon milling machine. I'm milling a slot of the same length in every brake block. And look, after I've finished, the cutting tool is still intact. And that's a first for me with this size of milling cutter. And after my miniature milling frenzy, all the blocks have got a nice slot which is exactly the same depth in exactly the same position. What I need to do now is make the part of the brake block that fits into the hanger. The slot in the brake hangers is really not very deep. I will have to shape the end of this piece of brass to fit into the brake hanger. And also I will need to drill a hole in it. And that way the brake block will be secured to the hanger by using a single bolt. In this clip I'm using my Proxon drilling machine, and this allows me to drill the holes in the brake block extensions very easily. I actually shaped the end of the piece of brass before I used the hanger as a jig, except for this last one, which I shaped after I drilled the hole. So here you see the principle. I now have a full set of brake blocks with mountings to allow them to be fastened into the hangers. And the next step is to silver solder all the components together. This clip shows me applying the flux to the components before I permanently silver solder them together. I'm in the outer part of the workshop, and all of the brake blocks are sat on a piece of stainless steel fire grate. This is the same stuff that I use in my miniature locomotives. This particular piece is an offcut that I bought from Blackgates Engineering. And it's not as good as a brazing hearth, but it's very convenient just to sit this fire grate on top of the vise for silver soldering small components. Needless to say, I thoroughly cleaned the components before assembling them, and now using the blowtorch I'm heating them to red heat and applying the silver solder. As I heat up the parts using the blowtorch, you will notice that I apply the silver solder when the flux takes on a watery appearance. and it runs around the joint. The next thing to do is to let the parts cool to black and quench them in water. What I need to do next is get them ready to go into the acid bath, and for this I'm using a piece of silver solder through the holes in the brackets. I've made a loop at each end of the silver solder to allow these parts to be suspended in the acid, and once I've tied on my piece of thin silicone rubber tubing, it's over to the acid bath. I haven't cleaned out the acid bath for some time, and as you can see there's still some things in there. There's still sufficient room to suspend the brake blocks in the acid though, and after about 24 hours they should be clean. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful.